it's my privilege, to having everybody over there. And we're talking about a very interesting session today regarding how will it be possible for the data centers, cloud network in Saudi Arabia to manage the demands that AI will make in terms of compute, storage, and connectivity. But it's just very important for right now because it has interlinked with the AI and the data center, and it is one of the key focus in the kingdom itself, because as you know that it's evolving. Google has started their operation, but AWS needs to start. It is they are in a journey for that. But before that, let me take the privilege to introduce the briefly the very knowledgeable audience. It's our great privilege to have them on board. So Mr. Milan is basically one of the key figures in the global data center, and he's the CEO of ConnectedCompute, an US international company in digital transformations. He has got a diverse background of 25 years in different areas, especially in the financial markets and other cases. And it is known for his strategic dots, how he bridge the dots. These are key focus, and he's a strategic leader. Welcome on board, Mr. Milan. Mr. Hassan is actually he based in Qatar. He's Ooredoo, Qatar, and he also the director of infrastructure at Ooredoo, Qatar, and he has a checkered career, especially different strategic projects. When this came up to FIFA World Cups 2022, he drove a couple of strategic projects in China and delivered. I would say that he's one of the key figures when it comes to IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS services. And welcome, and especially he's also a thought leader, both in cloud computing and infrastructure. Welcome on board, Mr. Hassan. And then I will talk about regarding the William K. So Mr. William K actually is very difficult to catch here because when I talk, he keeps traveling. So I think that he keeps traveling across the globe, and even today is flying, like he was flying back. So he's based in London. He's actually the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Business Development for completely Europe for the Client Tech Center, and he has almost more than 15 years of experience, and he has a checkered career. I'll not take much time, it will take more of the time of the audience to if I can explain. He's a vision leader, especially he has a couple of the leading organizations of the industry, DC Byte, Collier, and Forta Data Center. These are one of the big names in the data center. It's privileged to welcome Mr. King. And this list, but the last but not least, my name is Dr. Debashis. I worked, it's one of my key focuses here. I work across the globe more than 28 years. KPMG, Anestia, TCS, QNB, and then and one of them government organization presently. And I am hands-on certified in AWS and Google, mostly in the machine learning and solution architecting and others. And my passion is key focus is AI, and I do a lot of initiative. I start up AI for All initiative. It's a free initiative for the professionals across time, because I think that the AI is the new oil and the new money. So that's an overall the basis, and it's my privilege to welcome on everybody. So I'll go to the first question, because before, as you know, that the question of AI and interface with the data center is a key focus. The reason being, as we talk, Google has a presence here in the kingdom. There's a different story, data center, but as we have a very stringent regulations, and there's a lot of capability, and AWS is a global leader, and Google is also just vying for that. As there's also, so they need to have. They say that in the last leap 24, which is by 24, that this year that they announced that 2025 they will do the data center, but they could not. My understanding, as per the public knowledge, they could not. They cannot implement that. So because it's all interface about the AI and other interface. So this is a very hottest challenge. And other point I give on board the audience who may not have the right background of the kingdom, because they have giving a trust in the kingdom for the artificial intelligence. There is AI index. The kingdom is now GCC ranking 1, and complete GCC, because initially Dubai was the driving ministry of artificial intelligence. They are driving much ahead, but right now there's a lot of focus in AI and understanding, and they have the PI is more than 40 billion USD. The AI. So they want to have the AI enabled, So I want to talk about your valuable insight for the audience, what you can bring in the discussion and take away the knowledge, overall perspective. My first question go to Mr. Milan. Mr. Milan, what do you think? Because I understand your key background, you cutting across the different organizations, you have a very checker career, especially when you have finding the data center, the adopting AI-driven framework, because the challenge will be they have a current framework, but when you have to change the scalability and their zero downtime, how they'll adopt and go through the journey for a AI-driven, adapting to your AI-driven workload. What's your thought?
For the data centers?
Yeah.
Look, I think that fundamentally the Saudi market from a data center perspective is relatively immature. I mean, you hear some numbers being thrown around. I was debating this just now with Colin. You know, the range of what people think is deployed and live across to what's under construction. And I think there's a gigawatt disparity in the figures that are in that magazine that we've all been given today, right? So I don't really think there's a deep understanding of what the overall environment actually is. And there's obviously a lot of kind of announcements that are perhaps confused. Within that, if you look back into 2023, about 80% of the capacity that did exist was non-carrier neutral. Okay, so it was essentially under the control of Center 3, SDC, etc. So I think we need to acknowledge that from a data center deployment perspective, we're in the relatively early stages of execution. And those that have set about executing, there are other people in the room who are aware, there are projects which have not been delivered, which are now 2 years late already, right? So Riyadh, Dammam, I mean, that gives you a sense for how much of a learning curve there may still be on traditional capacity, traditional densities, traditional designs, air-cooled. So we're now talking about going to AI, right? And there's obviously quite a wave of investment and potential funding to come. We'll see how quickly the funding is actually made available, and of course that will be customer-driven. Okay? So let's see how that plays out. But I do worry about the quality of project execution, number one. And that project execution is going to have to start becoming a little bit more seamless in order to persuade the hyperscalers that they need to take the risk. Right. Number two, there's quite a step change, which even in the more developed markets, the operators are still grappling with in terms of what is the optimal, in today's terms, what's the optimal design, right? So it's no longer fan walls. Even NVIDIA is throwing a spanner in the works and saying, hey guys, we're all going back to raised floors. Wait for it, right? When we start to get above 150 kilowatt racks, you're all going to have to go back to raised floors. You talk to the vendors of raised floors, we're just going to put a few more supports in, right? No one really understands what the right way forward in terms of cooling will be. People understand direct to chip, liquid cooling. A lot of people confuse water with liquid cooling. Not necessarily the same, so you have to be a little bit, we heard that earlier on. So I think there's a lot to happen. Then you've got the operational side of things, right? The operations today, if we, actually I think your company, does a lot with Microsoft and so on. They'll freely admit that it took a year plus to get to grips with Microsoft operating standards, right? And I think it was a relatively challenging time, right? So, that's yet to come for all of these operators. And so I don't think it's going to be plain sailing. And then you can get onto the discussion around climate. Is Saudi or UAE, for that matter, the right place to put training workloads, or should we just stick to inferencing? And then I think it comes back to, I think my final point here is, the one thing that data center operators generally don't get right is they don't really understand what workloads they're trying to address at the outset, because that ultimately will guide you through all the other elements. That will tell you what connectivity, density you have, and too much of this stuff is being built without due consideration of connectivity density. And latency, I think, is becoming perhaps the most important element in all of this. And that's, I think, a new consideration in this part of the world. People haven't paid much attention to latency and the implications of that.
Amazing, Mr. Milan. So you spot on the latency, and where I believe that if you take a global standard, AI can come in place. But one of the key challenges also you mentioned rightly, the project execution, because we might have a funding, but we need to have a right roadmap and right project deliverables. And project is a key challenge for delivery. And one of the big things, the key benefits that you invest in UAE, right? So you know the regional landscape, right? How the data center, the regional landscape, how is maturity model, what are the stages. So what are the two key things that I can think that it might be the takeaway? One is the key focus, global focus on the latency, which should be AI driven, how we can optimize and can make it as a part of our project. You know, and number two is that the project execution. Project execution is one of the key challenges that struggle, especially the many of the cases they do not anticipate, because I have also executed many projects. So they don't foresee actual what are the key challenges and they later discover. They do not learn from the lesson learned previously. That's one of the key challenges. Amazing. So thank you so much for your great input. So and I'll go to so now I'll go to Mr. Hassan. So and the questions that how do you see the telecom providers adapting their infrastructure strategies to accommodate AI's incentive bandwidth requirements? Because you are coming from the the organization you must have implemented with similar, that was also Mr. Milan is talking about. So what you see from a practitioner's perspective?
So thanks for the question. So the first thing which I want to say is that we need to separate hype from reality, because I've seen a lot of people talk about AI as if it's just going to come over and everything else is just it's doomsday for everyone else. That's not the case. There was a very nice article from Goldman Sachs which I read was about plowing so much money into AI and what the return is going to be. I know not a whole lot of people like that subject or talk about it, but that is something that we need to actually be cognizant of. Second is that in terms of once you separate reality from the hype that we have, and the Gartner hype cycle, if you look at that, that also puts us right at the top. Once we have separated those, then we come to the actual data bandwidth requirements. So fiber, of course, and the technology that you use on the fiber, that is very helpful. What we're trying to do now is we're increasing the homes passed, for example, or the businesses passed with fiber. But that's not going to be possible in all the cases. So what then happens is you look at 5G. And in some cases, 6G for ultra low latency applications and remote surgeries and those kind of things, which is currently being discussed. Of course, we haven't rolled that out. But it's funny that a couple of weeks back, I was talking to a CTO of a very large organization, and he said that we don't have any use cases for 5G. And I was wondering, how are you going to deliver any AI application or any workloads that rely remotely on AI if you don't go for 5G slicing and QoS that you can do with 5G and not 4G? So I think that understanding is a little bit not there, but if it is, there are ways to mitigate this. Now within the network, we have, for example, our storage NVMe, we have our, initially we were working on 10 gig networks inside the data centers. We upgraded to 25 to 100 gigs. So I think once we have that covered, and then the access networks are maybe 5G and moving to 6G, I think there's an evolution there that will be able to handle this kind of stuff. That's my opinion.
Amazing. You're spot on, because if AI enabled, we need a higher bandwidth, right? Not only bandwidth, other parts, the capability, especially if we work remotely. At least the minimum requirement 5G. Without 5G, it will be very it's unrealistic. I would say not difficult, unrealistic to do that one. Especially if you go for a low latency, it's no way it will be applicable. But and 60 hour trip. So thank you so much for bringing on board on this part. And I will go to the Mr. Milan again and catch him without your flight. So what trend you are seeing in the expansion of data center across EMA regions? And because you are in India, particularly in response to AI demands in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Especially that you work in Europe and you have some understanding also of the kingdom's landscape. So what you see and what's the guidance you bring forth for us to take it forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So it was funny when I joined Prime at the beginning of the year. so my title was for Europe, but we quickly realised that our ambitions were further, so we changed all our titles to EMEA, but I've forgotten to do that on LinkedIn, so I need to do that. And the reason for that was because of the demands of our clients, and specifically the ones we're serving in the US right now. I think in Europe right now, AI is still in its infancy. It's not quite as far forward as people necessarily suggest. In the US, we are developing full AI data centers for our clients, and the specific AI-based clients, not just the standard hyperscalers that do the cloud side. In Europe, I would say that the majority of the demand is still falling within the availability zones. Whether it's AI demand or normal cloud demand, it's still in those restricted zones, in those availability zones that are set up. So, and hyperscalers will openly say the reason for that is so they can switch the loads and they can be flexible with the space, so they can wait for the adoption to continue in Europe. I think the other thing we've seen in Europe, in the summer, the EU passed the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. That has led to a lot of questions on how you deploy AI in Europe. It's been perceived negatively so far, and that's also coincided, I would say, with a lot of our clients asking us to look at this region far more. And the demand, or the demands they are asking us for are exponential, up to 1 gigawatt at a time campuses. Now, we haven't seen that be developed, obviously, but they are the sort of demands we are being asked for. The obvious answer to your question is size and scale. We are seeing larger requirements. I think we are seeing larger requirements anyway, and that's partly for the cloud side. But for instance, we're developing 3 data centers in Chicago right now, and that will total 170 megawatts for the campus and will likely go to a single tenant. We're expecting the same tenant to take the rest of it. And that's becoming very standard. We are seeing power constraints. I think another trend we will see in Europe that we're seeing in the US, but I don't know if this is as applicable here, is self-generation. It has got to the point where our transmission network cannot cope with the demands. There are so many other demands on it. A lot of them haven't been invested in for quite a while, so they haven't got new capacity. The US is further forward in that. There's a lot of talk about these small modular reactors. It'd be interesting to see how quickly people genuinely think they can develop them and have the design signed off. I suspect Europe will be slower at that than the US will be. But there is a limit on how much further we can go with those networks, whereas I think one of the attractions for operators like ourselves, but also our clients, is there is a can-do attitude connected to the grid here and developing, which makes life a lot easier considering how important power is to us.
Amazing, you spot on. And one of the things that you rightly mentioned, one of the factors is that obviously the regulations in Europe, they will slow down, because initially I always say virtually of open source. Initially on the different platforms, right now I'm meant to believe that there should be a focus of expand on the AI density. And if we see that last I was I keep my posting as well. The interview of the intern who got the Nobel Prize recently. He's saying that I was flabbergasted when he called, he was in a small place. He was a very humble guy. So he was saying flabbergasted, but he said in an interview that you have to be careful about they should not overtake us. So it will premature that to say that, but from the NASA we should not lay a black box. Regulations correct, but regulation, the implementation we should not be over-regulated. So if it's over-regulated, it will stifle innovations and stop our journey. So that's one of the place lands on regulator, we cannot help it. And that's a very good point you raised that one. Thank you so much. So I'll go back to again to Mr. Milan, around the questions. So how will the AI revolution redefine the role of data centers in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, which is close to my passion, actually, Vision 2030. Because just to tell you before that, it was incepted in 2018 because I did one of my consulting company. I worked closely with the kingdom. So in 2018, when they developed this one, the team who developed, they're so foresighted. And if you see today, out of 96, the key statements related, 66 touch upon AI and data. Very interesting. So that's question over to you, Srimila, because you are you have a checkered career, I have deep expectations.
So I think if you look at each of the markets in the Middle East and you track when the hyperscalers really started to invest, there are 2 or 3 triggers that you can see. So one is the introduction of credible, well-governed internet exchanges. Number 2 is transit zones. And then number 3 is dark fiber availability and tariffs. Okay, so if you think of each of those, you need an internet exchange, you need to have some sort of diversity in connectivity, you need to have a relatively free-flowing amount of data. That is usually adjacent to or sitting, within the transit zone, which then effectively gives you a free zone for international connectivity. Okay, and then you've got dark fiber. No hyperscaler is going to be willing over time to subject themselves to metered tariffs at the kind of rates we've seen in the regulated connectivity markets. It's just not desirable or feasible. So when you look at the Saudi market, actually they've made very good progress on each of those. Well, then you say, okay, so how do we measure that success? If you then go and look at some of the IP peering statistics on the internet exchanges in this market, so you've got SAIX, you've then got the new Lynx-sponsored exchange and so on in Jeddah. The traffic going through those now on an average basis has exceeded UAE, right, in a very short space of time. So something interesting is going on where you're starting to see a kind of certainly evening out or even a shift in the centre of gravity of the connectivity ecosystem. Bahrain actually had a very good initial start with the telco and so on. Saudi's now sort of taking the lead. So actually all the investment and some of what was described as a relatively vague regulatory structure is actually working in this country's favour, arguably, because it's not impeding any kind of progress. So I think that's kind of critical. And then look, in the end we'll see what is deployed. Certainly, this whole regional hub piece is up for grabs. The power piece is very interesting. I understand the government is looking at some subsidised electricity pricing, even below the $4.50 cents for some of these large-scale deployments, and the renewable element will be critical. I don't think any hyperscaler, for example, is going to be willing to sacrifice progress towards net zero, through these large-scale deployments. So there's some elements that will have to be solved. So on the one hand, it isn't the most obvious logical place to put hundreds of megawatts of training models, but it is a good place potentially because of the connectivity and the subsea cable piece that was mentioned earlier, with STC expanding the 2 Africa cable into the Gulf. It is a good place potentially to put a lot of inferencing workloads, and I think that'll be a sweet spot. In the end for Saudi will be these 20 to 30 kilowatt rack type deployments for AI inferencing with the kind of international connectivity running through the transit zone, and that'll be able to service, I think, a number of neighbouring markets as well.
It's amazing. So this referencing will also help in the labour markets also. How?
Absolutely. So when you think about, and then actually I should mention, you've also got the terrestrial fibre projects, which I think will start to disintermediate Egypt potentially, which has clearly been a roadblock to progress. So you'll end up with a much more vibrant connectivity ecosystem, but it'll be a logical place to put some of the inferencing workloads. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much for a great insight. So I was not aware of that actually. Thank you so much. So the next question to Mr. Hassan. How should data centers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia prepare for anticipated growth in AI-generated data over the next decade? So there's two parts. One part is that how the strategy, and it is giving a paradigm shift when you talk about AI-generated data. So what's your thought?
Certainly. Gen AI is, for us actually, I'm going to ask this question because for us, within Ooredoo as well, we have been very much focused on leveraging this capability with the hyperscalers. And we're using currently both Google and Microsoft Azure we have as well. And I think what we're trying to do with AI in general is trying to leverage inferencing, as you correctly mentioned, because training isn't something we would do. In terms of inferencing, we have a couple of initiatives we're working on. Without going into the details of those initiatives, but what we're trying to do is leverage existing data that we have and leverage the inferencing capabilities of the models that we have, OpenAI, for example, and moving on that route. Also, what we're now trying to do is automate with RPA, Lex RPA, and other things. Automate the processes that will leverage the Gen AI capabilities that we have on the hyperscalers. The one thing that we have just recently started talking about is because of the Cloud Act, which was in 2018, I think it was passed, the Cloud Act, is to also provide or build sovereign capabilities within our environment. And now that brings us this challenge that all of our data centers, which are currently, I think 4.5 kilowatt is the average if you look at the legacy data centers, and then bringing them up to be able to host these Gen AI workloads. It's a conundrum that we basically all face. And then we start talking about different strategies or how do we manage this, because every Gen AI workload that you will go after, you're going to have a impact on your data center. A recent study that I did for our use case was that if we are to only have 10% of our footprint in Gen AI workloads, we will be looking at a 3 to 4x increase in our power requirements, which is a disaster. And right now my challenge is we have a requirement to run Gen AI workloads. In some cases, by the way, to be pragmatic about this, in some cases people don't know what they want, so they just want the chips to be there, but they really don't have use cases for them. But in other cases, they have the use cases. Now my challenge is, yes, we want to go with Gen AI and we want to leverage this for both our automation and knowledge mining use cases. But the issue is that we are now, we have a bottleneck. We have a power bottleneck now. So as much as we want a Gen AI to be there, we have to fix the back-end problem, and that's what you referred to as well, this modular nuclear reactors. And I've been thinking about it, and I was like, how's that going to work? How about the security and the radiation and the fallouts and all those sorts of things that will come with it? Is it even realistic? How can we make it safe? So there's so many things that come with it that, yes, while we want to do Gen AI, and we are doing it, it's not a free-for-all because you have the back-end limitations that kind of inhibit this a little bit, at least for us. I mean, I'm sure there's many different parties working on eliminating this, but that's a bit of a challenge for us at this stage.
Amazing, spot on. I mean, because one of the key challenges is that we do not have the right use cases in Gen AI. Because it has multiple businesses, yes, impact. Cutting across storage, capabilities, everything, infrastructure. You just adopt. You can just plug and play something different. So absolutely. So what is the readiness is important. Overall basis, the readiness to migrate that, and especially the use cases, which will at least see the scalability and the power. Power its consumption, it will be very, very high. Very high. You're right. You want to say?
It is, the power requirement is very high, but you actually mentioned that point, and a lot of people don't talk about it, is what are you trying to do with the AI? Are you going to train your models? It's going to cost you a lot of money. And do you even need to train your models? For our use case, we don't need to. So we should go with inferencing. If we go with that, then our power requirements are a few factors lower than those for training workloads. Because we are, at least in the tech-co industry, as we want to call it, we are not there to train the model, or at least we don't need to. Not at this stage. It may come later. But for now, we just need to inference whatever we have, and for that, maybe 2025, kilowatt density we could run with not having to go with the Blackwell and top of the line chips as well. We could do that with regular chips, for which we also don't need the export licenses that we need for other chips. So yeah.
It's spot on, and that's a good idea. The inferencing, if you go, we can, the power and everything we can save actually. So if you think that we don't have to train, that will be a big win, to be honest. You're spot on. So thank you so much for the amazing input. So I'll go to the William again. So William, just how do you prepare data centers incorporate sustainability in this growth strategy? Because net zero we've touched upon. So growth strategy, especially given it has high energy demands, and obviously the contribution to the overall atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sustainability obviously is at the top of the agenda for everyone now. So Prime recently this year we published our first energy sustainability report, where we set targets of being fully renewable energy by 2030, publishing our full carbon breakdown from next year. So I think we're all moving in the right direction. We've been changing from diesel to HVO oil. We've been reducing our water usage over time. There was a period in the industry where we increased our water usage so as to reduce our power consumption, but that was actually realised that as we move more renewable energy, it makes more sense to increase the power usage again and reduce the water consumption. I think the industry itself actually has been a pioneer in this for a long time. It probably doesn't always get the credit it deserves. The hyperscalers, the data center operators, one of the big reasons why renewable energy projects, solar and wind particularly, came down in price over time, because they were committing to these sites before they were commercially viable. The market would buy that power, and that allowed them to be financed in economies of scale and reduce the costs. So in general, I think we have done a lot of good for the sustainability movement. How we continue that, it's going to get harder and harder over time, because obviously we're now using more and more power. So we've got to, there is a limit on how much renewable energy there is as of today, and some of these projects can take a long time to come online. I think in Europe, we're finding the same issues with connecting to the grid as putting energy into the grid, and actually we find the big power users are actually stopping the energy they want coming in, because there's only a certain amount of days to connect to these substations, and this is a huge issue right now. When you're talking about some of the largest transformers are on a 4-year lead time, a lot of these projects are very, very delayed. That's so far, in my experience, not something we've experienced in this region. The ability to develop these projects far quicker has been really, really key for us. Obviously, the energy input itself needs to become more renewable over time, but I think there are big strides to be being made on that. But for me, the single biggest issue, and hence the reason we talked about SMRs, and I say the jury's out on how quickly, if they happen, is the transmission rather than the generation. That is holding up all of the inputs. It's holding up the outputs. It's why people are, especially in the US and Europe, we're now sort of accepting that long-term data centers, new data centers will need to be developed off-grid, because there's only a certain amount of resource to go around, and that's needed for everything else as well. But it's how do we do that in a sustainable way? Because as of today, normally that would be gas generation when you go off-grid. Long-term, obviously, we can't continue to do that. But I do think the industry, though, has made a lot of strides, and has actually always been one of the best at putting renewable energy forward quicker, say, than a lot of other heavy users of power have been.
Amazing. So you are talked the right point, but I'm just wondering, because there are the trade-offs, right? So obviously there are multiple trade-offs. The get benefit and other things that you have to sacrifice a couple of things that you cannot do. And it's a non-issue. Net zero is obviously your key. So in the overall growth strategy, do you have any specific input to incorporate for any of the practitioners?
In terms of making more sustainable?
Just more, without losing the key essence. So, yeah.
So, for instance, we've made targets on our water usage to reduce that considerably, as we think that especially the US has had a lot of issues with that, huge amounts of water consumption. We made targets to be fully renewable energy, so we're always looking for that. We're looking where we can, this is obviously very client-led, how we find ways to reduce the amount of backup generation. But again, that comes back to what clients can accept, and there's hope with AI that there could be ways to mitigate this more. I know a hyperscaler in their own developments at the moment are looking to reduce the amount of backup generation and more have a managed shutdown that happens through UPS. But ultimately, as a data center operator, we are led by our clients. There are certain things we can do, and we will build more sustainably, we'll use more sustainable projects, more energy efficiency. But the limitations come with what our clients will ultimately accept in the product and the SLAs we are providing them.
Amazing, amazing. So thank you so much. So we just to sum it up for the interest of the time, that it's amazing. So there are multiple key takeaways. So the moving towards a journey to AI-enabled data center is not a this because there is a lot of hype, but there's some realistic. We need to take right use cases, right framework, some inference, or even the net zero. So multiple, you have to think in a 360-degree enable way rather than it's a quick, straightforward. And multiple things. So when we have time for the questions, so let the questions or the audience. Do you have any questions?
Hello. Yeah. My question is to Mr. Milan and Radia. Yeah, I mean, you talked about execution challenges. So, what do you think? Like, what are the challenges that you think of? I mean, just in single phrase, execution challenges. Doesn't elaborate anything.
Sure. So look, I mean, you can take certain examples of projects. Quite often there's a tendency to try and save money. So the operator will go shopping around and say, right, here's a cheap civil contractor, okay? And then here's an MEP consultancy, okay? And barely the two will meet, right? And then there'll be a kind of overall design. The civil contractor leaves after some lengthy delays because they don't have a BIM, kind of model online. So there's no proper information sharing on the specification and so on. The MEP consultancy arrives for the implementation phase, everything's wrong. The risers are in the wrong place, etc., etc. So you end up reworking extensive elements of the project. That's one great example where what you're missing in that is kind of an overlay, right? Where day one, everyone needs to be together, assembled on the project, executing hand in hand. And then you need to have a proper program and project management function, which then essentially assimilates all of that and monitors progress. So, I used to work at Digital Realty Interaction, which got bought by Digital Realty. They had a team, PTEC, Design Technology Engineering Group. Absolutely, we would use third-party MEP consultants. We would have civil contractors, we would have general contractors, Bouygues, and whatever it was. But that team would be constantly on the case, monitoring to ensure that all of the elements were done in a consistent way, so that what was being delivered by the civil contractor was consistent with the design and thereafter, and able to troubleshoot. And that discipline, that type of understanding of the rigors of the project, I don't see it so much here. And I think that's caused some of the issues, for example, that we've seen.
Thank you. I just heard in the previous previous session also that at all the stages, AI is still in infancy. So I just wanted to understand that why, if AI generated data, where it is being generated and how it is being transported, communicated. So why is it a race to build, this hyperscalers or AI type of data centers, AI-enabled data centers, ready data centers? So I just wanted to know, what's the time frame do you think that AI would mature and we would be having fully functional AI data centers? This question could be to anyone. If Mr. Abbas can answer it.
I think the hype is followed by adoption. So what's going to happen now is there's a lack of understanding of Gen AI as well as what we should do with it. what's happening, and this is first-hand experience because people, they ask for knowledge mining or these kind of use cases, and they're very basic use cases. And a lot of people don't understand what it can actually do for you. While we're at the top of the Gartner hype cycle, because I like to quote that a lot because it kind of makes sense as well, once that fades away, the actual adoption comes in. If the data centers aren't ready, we won't be able to deliver that. So that is why it's more like a Gantt chart, because you must have all of the fundamentals ready. Because right now, my challenge right now is, I have use cases, but I don't have power. My team has just told me last week, we don't have power to deploy certain servers because the power is being sucked up by someone else. It's like a vacuum cleaner. So that's why I think they have to be ready now. The industry is moving forward in the right direction. There's so many, we're putting all these heads together to see how we can manage the power issues and have these data centers ready. The data hall design, I mean, AI data halls will be different. All of that stuff has to happen now for us to adopt this later on. Because right now, if we are 5% automated with AI, imagine if this goes to 60, 70, 80%. How are we going to deal with that? So that is why I think readiness is kind of fundamental and is needed at this stage.
And when you come back to where training should live, you've now got deployments. One announced, you probably saw the 1 million GPUs in the US, right? That's where the training will happen, at an immensely efficient, low cost. You can, NVIDIA, have a case study. They managed to train all of the Southern European languages on one LLM within a month, right? So what you'll see is these immense installations which will cycle through specific workloads, churn it out, and then they can be made available for inferencing. And the thing about inferencing, it is going to be very latency sensitive. So that's going to be much more local, because we're not just interrogating ChatGPT for textual responses. We're asking for entire videos, slideshows, photographs, high bandwidth type materials. And by the way, we spend a lot of time talking to Meta and some of the other hyperscalers. The networks are full. So Meta in this region is scaling back the quality of the reels we watch on Instagram and Facebook because of bandwidth constraints, and they're bringing forward billions of dollars of investment to cope with the network overload that they're facing right now. So localizing some of that inferencing is going to be critical for that reason as well.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate a point that's already been made, but it's the long lead times to develop the data centers as well. So across the world right now, when we apply for power, it's not unusual to hear 2030, 2031 for when we have the application. And if you hear 2030, it's not going to be in 2030, but it's a long enough lead time where they know they're probably 2032 as you get closer. But even if even if that power was available today, we've got to order the transformers. That's 2 to 4 years. We potentially have got to go through the permitting process. Different countries take a bit of time. It's going to take 18 months to 2 years to develop the data center. Depending where it is, it could be longer. And then the client themselves, they then need to fit out the space as well, which is going to take time. So it's going to take a while for even demand today to feed through. And it's based on that future demand to start developing today. And in the US, we have clients coming saying, what do you have available today? And like every operator, and they normally will come back and say, we've spoken to every operator and say, no one has anything before 27, 28 or so. The size of these data centers we're talking about, the majority of them you're unlikely to start developing speculatively as well. You might get a lot of the work done ready to go, but you're going to be 2 to 3 years away just from when the client is committed. So it takes time. These are big infrastructure projects.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can I? Okay. First of all, thank you for the meaningful session. I heard about sustainability. In this region, whenever there is a project specification prepared, the sustainability, that word is always there, but how far we are sincere to that? Because we see a typical design, always like generator and utility always in this country coming from the generator. So both these cause SOC 1 and SOC 2 carbon footprint, and never we see hardly a step taken to address this one. I think in this part of the world, solar power is immense, and steps taken to like BESS, energy storage system, is I don't see much. So since William and Hassan talk about self-generation and possibilities, there are trends coming up like hydrogen solutions. But what do you think about this solar, making use of this solar, and making more sustainable? Because even the projects like Milan, they always have generated diesel, and prime power is coming from a diesel source, where it was carbon footprint. So, what do you think? What step we should take regarding the solar? Because that has never come as an initiative in any other project. Yes, thank you.
So I think steps are being taken. There is a lot of solar under development in this region, specifically here. We are actively talking about connecting to that. As of today, it is intermittent, obviously, and same as wind. And so you either need to have large-scale battery storage, which we don't have today at scale. I think there's probably only really one country that does, and that's China, which has that huge amounts of scale. But batteries are falling in price considerably. The technologies are changing very quickly, so I suspect that will continue to increase. You've seen steps like the UAE built their first nuclear power station that provides base load power, so that's green, but you can connect to that and there's no issues with the intimacy there. I think ultimately a lot, you say about the backup generation, as I said before, a lot is going to come down to the clients and their ways of working. Ultimately, we are paid to be always on. And so we need generators, so we're going to have to continue installing generators. We can make them greener and more renewable over time. We've looked at, say, gas generation as well, which is greener than traditional diesel. But we have to act for our clients, and we will connect to solar and use solar where we can, but we also will need either backup through the grid, as well as backup on site to make sure when that isn't the sun's not shining, that we can still run the data center.
Amazing. So that's it, answers the questions, right? So thank you so much for your time. I mean, it's a great pleasure. And but the last the word is that the journey for AI is irreversible. It is maybe in infancy, but it will gradually mature. Multiple challenges, which is most of the unknowns, because when you test as in new places, the right way to write the use cases, and sum it up, inference, and as you rightly said that all about the 5G moving to 5G, and if you can get to 6G, you are done. And obviously, everything has a trade-off. So net zero is sustainability, because it's many of the cases it is not unheard a couple of 1 years or before in the regions. Actually, I'm not talking about at mass market, but there is multiple trade-offs. But thank you for your input. The journey continues, and thank you all the audience over. Okay, please.
Okay, so I mentioned about the 5G and 6G on the strategy, but I thought that we mentioned the quantum computing, because it's a fact right now, and it has some applications, and as well it will have a severe impact on the security systems that are running currently. So what is the readiness for some data centers for incubating quantum computers, and what will be the impact for this?
So you probably saw Google made a dramatic announcement on quantum computing, I guess, right? Where they essentially announced that they're managing to now solve some of the stability issues and in fact improve the stability of the models as the number of kind of nodes increases. So, I mean, from a credible, realistic operator perspective, as we sit today, it's way too far out to be something that any operator would be really contemplating right now, right? They're still grappling with the high densities that we're going to get just for the NVIDIA chips, who are signaling they're going to 400 kilowatt racks by the end of 26, going into 2027, right? What we're talking about here takes into a whole new paradigm. My view is that's going to be restricted to scientific institutes, for example, government-sponsored institutes in Switzerland, US, and so on, or Google, Amazon themselves, Microsoft themselves as well, working on this within their own organizations and developing their own kind of ways of testing that. Kind of another way, I mean, look at the subsea data centers. Again, all of those projects really were tested by the hyperscalers within their own organizations without any assistance from third-party data center operators. So I think we're a long, long way away from commercialization of these type of technologies for widespread usage.
Just before that, I had one point to respond, just had one. So if you see that 2 days back, Google has announced another of our quantum computing chip, right, in addition to that. It's something very new, actually it's one of my key passions over there. It's being, if quantum computing is implemented, most of their security system all are vulnerable. Most of the quantum. So it's like another, you can say it's very advanced stage. We know where we can anticipate what is the right. It's my thought. So we will know where you can anticipate what are the challenges. It's totally unfathomable. That's my thought.
We'll take this one last question and then wrap up the.
Thank you. This is Sharif from HT Company. Actually, my question is about the data center. Basically, it's an industry driven by IT infrastructure manufacturers. And I'm pretty sure that we have witnessed the transformation from the traditional air-cooled to liquid cooling technology driven by the IT manufacturers, which it has a direct impact on data center facilities in terms of design and build. Meanwhile, the other side, due to the lack of maturity in the standards and either an operations role, the data center developer and data center hyperscaler, they're trying to maneuver away of this challenge by keep the things running as it is on air cooled. So my question is how the data center hyperscaler can fulfill by their contribution, and there's such a gap between the transformation happening in IT infrastructure in terms of cooling and the existence of the traditional legacy air-cooled data center. The second part of my question about the sustainability. We all know that the making Saudi Arabia as a digital hub is a part of 2030 vision. And they developed, the government here in Saudi, they developed an attractive tariff for power, which is, it has a direct impact on the design and philosophy of operation for data center developers, regardless they're adapting their PUE levels. Meanwhile, in this Saudi 2030 vision, there's a big part about sustainability and net zero approach. So maybe at a certain point of time, there's some regulation will be come into the industry and talk about the PUE levels to be adapted from the hyperscaler to achieve the net zero requirement of 2030. So again, how the hyperscaler developer will sustain this. However, they started their operation and design philosophy based on very low tariff for kilowatt. Thank you.
Should I touch on the first? So I think one point I would make is it's not possible to retro upgrade a data center with any conviction from air cooling to direct to chip. I assume you're talking about direct to chip liquid cooling, which is, I think, where we've kind of settled, right, rather than immersive cooling. What the hyperscalers are doing right now is they're leveraging NVIDIA. So when you have a discussion around, so we're involved in one project which is over 100 megawatts in Europe. You see the data center operator, which is a build-to-suit operator, You see the hyperscale customers, of which there are 2 on this campus, and their teams who are working on all sorts of initiatives within their own organizations. And then you see NVIDIA involved, as it happens, providing its input. Because the operator, I mean, if you ask a typical operator, oh, you're building for AI, what's your floor loading? They won't know the answer. You're talking about 2.5 to 3 metric ton racks, and then you're talking about electrical buggies that need to ferry these racks around. The floor loading in any kind of legacy or traditional data center can't cope straight away. So all of these factors and considerations, and the rack dispersion. So one MEP consultancy in Malaysia tells me they're using a 7 square meters per rack dispersion in the IT data hall, whereas traditionally people would have been using 2.5 square meters. Now, is it airflow or what are they doing? So all of these parameters becoming quite complex, and what you're seeing is this process of iteration between some of the chip manufacturers, the hyperscalers, the data center operators, and the MEP design consultants to sort of triangulate. And you saw Schneider waded into the debate. They've now come out with what they describe as a sort of reference design for AI cooling. So everyone's now inverting the same. So everyone's trying to be at the table to sort of try and iterate towards something that is workable for the next kind of generation in an efficient way.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One of the big issues is the floor loadings. For instance, I'm aware of a data center where new servers have gone in, and the weight of them is so considerable, and the power is that actually, whereas these were full racks, there's only 2 servers per rack, and how to cope with that. So you can't, as you say, you can't retrofit a data center just to cope with it. I would say though that everything is changing. Again, these things take time as well. We've been designing data centers pretty similarly for quite a long time. We're now turning that on its head. The hyperscalers have been coming up with their own designs on how they're going to address this, and that's direct to chip again. Operators, we ourselves have designs as well on how we will cope with this. One of our clients recently during discussion has asked for the design to change to direct to chip. So it is happening. It's starting in the US, like most things do, but it definitely is coming through. It just, when these announcements are made, it takes time for all the designs, the processes, and the engineering to go through as well. This is a huge shift for us. It's one of the biggest shifts probably we've been through in the industry in terms of design. In terms of your question on PUE, PUEs here are naturally going to be higher. You're coping with a far higher temperature differential. So you're not going to achieve the PUEs that you would in, say, cooler climates. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it would be any less sustainable just because the PUE is higher. If you've got fully renewable energy being used, if you can find ways to reduce your water usage, or at least recycle as much as possible, you can look at the way you're building a data center to keep it more sustainable. The PUE originally was the metric for sustainability. Traditionally, the power wasn't renewable when that metric was created, but now as we become more renewable, we can still be sustainable with a higher PUE.
Thank you so much. I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much for your presence and giving a lot of input. We believe that we can take our journey in the AI-driven data center or data center enabled with emerging technology to the next forward. Have a great day. Thank you so much. I like to laugh here.